All right. It is coming up on 8 o'clock, so let's go ahead and sit down, settle in, get comfortable, and get back to the book, shall we? Welcome back. This is our 6th night of reading from Alexandre Dumas's The Three Musketeers. Last time, you may remember, the royal ballet was held, and the queen produced the diamond studs that were given to her, not consort, but given to the Duke of Buckingham. D'Artagnan made good on his promise and came away the hero of the hour, unbeknownst to many. But what became of the Three Musketeers who stood in the way and helped to make sure that he was able to get to England and back? Well, I'm sure we'll find out here soon. So, let's go ahead and jump right back into things, and we'll hopefully see how things return to a little bit of normalcy. Just to be sure my monitor is working here, I would prefer we've got sound. I think we're good. Yep, yeah, we should be fine. Alright, so let's go ahead and resume now with chapter 23 of The Three Musketeers, The Rendezvous. D'Artagnan ran home immediately, and although it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and he had some of the worst quarters of Paris to traverse, he met with no misadventure. Everyone knows that drunkards and lovers have a protecting deity. He found the door of his passage open, sprang up the stairs, and knocked softly, in a manner agreed upon between him and his lackey Planchet, whom he had sent home 2 hours before from the Hotel de Ville. Telling him to sit up for him, opened the door for him. Has anyone brought a letter for me? Asked D'Artagnan eagerly. No one has brought a letter, monsieur, replied Planchet, but one has come of itself. What do you mean, blockhead? I mean to say that when I came in, although I had the key of your apartment in my pocket, and that key had never quit me, I found a letter on the green table cover in your bedroom. And where is that letter? I left it where I found it, monsieur. It is not natural for letters to enter people's houses in this manner. If the window had been open, or even ajar, I should think nothing of it, but no, all was hermetically sealed. Beware, monsieur. There is certainly some magic underneath. Hermetically sealed indeed. Huh. Meanwhile, the young man had darted into his chamber, and opened the letter. It was from Madame Bonacieux, and was expressed in these terms. There are many thanks to be offered to you, and to be transmitted to you, but this evening, about 10 o'clock at St. Cloud, in front of the pavilion which stands at the corner of the house of Monsieur d'Estrées, C.B. While reading this letter, D'Artagnan felt his heart dilated and compressed by that delicious spasm which tortures and caresses the hearts of lovers. It was the first billet he had received. It was the first rendezvous that had been granted him. His heart swelled by the intoxication of joy, felt ready to dissolve away at the very gate of that terrestrial paradise called love. Well, monsieur, said Planchet, who had observed his master grow red and pale successively, did I not guess truly? Is it not some bad affair? You are mistaken, Planchet, replied D'Artagnan, and as proof, there is a crown to drink my health. I am much obliged to monsieur for the crown he has given me, and I promise him to follow his instructions exactly. But it is not the less true that letters which come in this way into shut-up houses fall from heaven, my friend, fall from heaven. Then monsieur is satisfied, asked Planchet. My dear Planchet, I am the happiest of men. And I may profit by monsieur's happiness, and go to bed? Yes, go. May the blessings of heaven fall upon monsieur. But it is not the less true that that letter... And Planchet retired, shaking his head with an air of doubt, which the liberality of D'Artagnan had not entirely effaced. Left alone, D'Artagnan read and reread this billet. Then he kissed and re-kissed 20 times the lines traced by the hand of his beautiful mistress. At length he went to bed, fell asleep, and had golden dreams. At 7 o'clock in the morning, he arose and called Planchet, who, at the second summons, opened the door, his countenance not yet quite freed from the anxiety of the preceding night. "Planchet," said D'Artagnan, "I am going out for all day, perhaps. You are, therefore, your own master till 7 o'clock in the evening, but at 7 o'clock you must hold yourself in readiness with 2 horses." "There," said Planchet, "we are going again, it appears, to have our hides pierced in all sorts of ways." "You will take your musketoon and your pistols." "There now, didn't I say so?" cried Planchet. "I was sure of it! That cursed letter! Don't be afraid, you idiot. There is nothing in hand but a party of pleasure." "Ah, like the charming journey the other day, when it rained bullets and produced a crop of steel traps." "Well, if you are really afraid, Monsieur Planchet," resumed D'Artagnan, "I will go without you. I prefer traveling alone to having a companion who entertains the least fear." "Monsieur does me wrong," said Planchet. "I thought he had seen me at work." "Yes, but I thought perhaps you had worn out all your courage the first time. Monsieur shall see that upon occasion I have some left. Only I beg Monsieur not to be too prodigal of it, if he wishes it to last long. Do you believe you still have a certain amount of it to expend this evening?" "I hope so, Monsieur." "Well, then I count on you. At the appointed hour I shall be ready. Only, I believe that Monsieur had but 1 horse in the guard stables." "Perhaps there is but 1 at this moment, but by this evening there will be 4. It appears that your journey was a remounting journey, then." "Exactly so," said D'Artagnan, and nodding toward Planchet, he went out. Monsieur Bonacieux was at his door. D'Artagnan's intention was to go out without speaking to the worthy mercer, but the latter made so polite and friendly a salutation that his tenant felt obliged not only to stop, but to enter into conversation with him. Besides, how is it possible to avoid a little condescension toward a husband whose pretty wife has appointed a meeting with you that same evening at St. Cloud, opposite d'Estrees' pavilion? D'Artagnan approached him with the most amiable air he could assume. The conversation naturally fell upon the incarceration of the poor man, Monsieur Bonacieux, who was ignorant that D'Artagnan had overheard his conversation with the stranger of Meung, related to his young tenant the persecutions of that monster, Monsieur de Laffemas, whom he never ceased to designate, during his account, by the title of the Cardinal's executioner, and expatiated at great length upon the Bastille, the bolts, the wickets, the dungeons, the gratings, the instruments of torture. D'Artagnan listened to him with exemplary complaisance, and when he had finished, said, "And Madame Bonacieux, do you know who carried her off? For I do not forget that I owe to that unpleasant circumstance the good fortune of having made your acquaintance." "Ah," said Bonacieux, they took good care not to tell me that, and my wife, on her part, has sworn to me by all that's sacred that she does not know. But you," continued Monsieur Bonacieux, in a tone of perfect good fellowship, "what has become of you all these days? I've not seen you nor your friends, and I don't think you could gather all that dust that I saw Planchet brush off your boots yesterday from the pavement of Paris." "You are right, my dear Monsieur Bonacieux. My friends and I have been on a little journey. Far from here?" "Oh, Lord, no. About 40 leagues only. We went to take Monsieur Athos to the waters of Force, where my friends still remain." "And you have returned, have you not?" replied Monsieur Bonacieux, giving to his countenance a most sly air. "A handsome young fellow like you does not obtain long leaves of absence from his mistress, and we were impatiently waited for at Paris, were we not?" "My faith," said the young man, laughing, "I confess it, and so much more the readily. My dear Bonacieux, as I see there is no concealing anything from you. Yes, I was expected, and very impatiently, I acknowledge." A slight shade passed over the brow of Bonacieux, but so slight that D'Artagnan did not perceive it. "And we are going to be recompensed for our diligence," continued the mercer, with a trifling alteration in his voice. So trifling, indeed, that D'Artagnan did not perceive it any more than he had the momentary shade which, an instant before, had darkened the countenance of the worthy man. "Ah, may you be a true prophet!" said D'Artagnan, laughing. "No, what I say," replied Bonacieux, "is only that I may know whether I am delaying you." Why that question, my dear host?" asked D'Artagnan. "Do you intend to sit up with me?" "No, but since my arrest and the robbery that was committed in my house, I am alarmed every time I hear a door open, particularly in the night. What the deuce can you expect? I am no swordsman." "Well, don't be alarmed if I return at 1, 2, or 3 o'clock in the morning. Indeed, do not be alarmed if I do not come at all." This time, Bonacieux became so pale that D'Artagnan could not help perceiving it, and asked him what was the matter. "Nothing," replied Bonacieux, "nothing. Since my misfortunes I have been subject to faintnesses, which seize me all at once, and I have just felt a cold shiver. Pay no attention to it. You have nothing to occupy yourself with but being happy." "Then I have full occupation, for I am so. Not yet. Wait a little. This evening, you said." "Well, this evening will come, thank God, and perhaps you look for it with as much impatience as I do. Perhaps this evening Madame Bonacieux will visit the conjugal domicile." "Madame Bonacieux is not at liberty this evening," replied the husband seriously. "She is detained at the Louvre this evening by her duties." "So much the worse for you, my dear host, so much the worse. When I am happy, I wish all the world to be so, but it appears that is not possible." The young man departed, laughing at the joke, which he thought he alone could comprehend. "Amuse yourself well," replied Bonacieux in a sepulchral tone. But D'Artagnan was too far off to hear him, and if he had heard him in the disposition of mind he then enjoyed, he most certainly would not have remarked it. He took his way toward the hotel of Monsieur de Tréville. His visit of the day before, it is to be remembered, had been very short, and very little explicative. He found Tréville in a joyful mood. He had thought the king and queen charming at the ball. It is true, the cardinal had been particularly ill-tempered. He had retired at 1 o'clock under the pretense of being indisposed. As to their majesties, they did not return to the Louvre till 6 o'clock in the morning. "Now," said Tréville, lowering his voice, and looking into every corner of the apartment to see if they were alone, "now, let us talk about yourself, my young friend, for it is evident that your happy return has something to do with the joy of the king, the triumph of the queen, and the humiliation of his eminence. You must look out for yourself." "What have I to fear?" replied D'Artagnan, "as long as I shall have the luck to enjoy the favor of their majesties." "Everything, believe me. The cardinal is not the man to forget a mystification until he has settled account with the mystifier, and the mystifier appears to me to have the air of being a certain young Gascon of my acquaintance." "Do you believe that the cardinal is as well posted as yourself, and knows that I have been to London?" "The devil! You have been to London? Was it from London you brought that beautiful diamond that glitters on your finger? Beware, my dear D'Artagnan, a present from an enemy is not a good thing. Are there not some Latin verses upon that subject?" "Stop!" "Yes, doubtless," replied D'Artagnan, who had never been able to cram the first rudiments of that language into his head, and who had, by his ignorance, driven his master to despair. "Yes, doubtless there is one." "There certainly is one," said Monsieur de Tréville, who had a tincture of literature, "and Monsieur de Benserade was quoting it to me the other day. Stop a minute. Ah, this is it. Timeo Daneos et dona ferentes, which means beware of the enemy who makes you presents." That was intentionally hesitant there. My Latin is a little bit better than my French, but I don't think Tréville's is. "This diamond does not come from an enemy, monsieur," replied D'Artagnan. "It comes from the queen." "From the queen? Oh, ho, ho!" said Monsieur de Tréville. "Why, It is indeed a true royal jewel, which is worth 1,000 pistoles, if it is worth a denier. By whom did the queen send you this jewel? She gave it to me herself. Where? In the room adjoining the chamber in which she changed her toilet. How? Giving me her hand to kiss. You have kissed the queen's hand? Said Monsieur de Treville, looking earnestly at D'Artagnan. Her Majesty did me the honor to grant me that favor. And that in the presence of witnesses? Imprudent! Thrice imprudent! No, monsieur, be satisfied. Nobody saw her, replied D'Artagnan, and he related to Monsieur de Treville how the affair came to pass. Oh, the women! The women! Cried the old soldier. I know them by their romantic imagination. Everything that savors of mystery charms them. So you've seen the arm, that was all. You would meet the queen, and she would not know who you are. No, but thanks to this diamond, replied the young man. Listen, said Monsieur de Treville. Shall I give you counsel? Good counsel, the counsel of a friend. You will do me honor, monsieur, said D'Artagnan. Well then, off to the nearest goldsmith's, and sell that diamond for the highest price you can get from him. However much of a Jew he may be, he will give you at least 800 pistoles. Pistoles have no name, young man, and that ring has a terrible one, which may betray him who wears it. Sell this ring, a ring which comes from my sovereign? Never, said D'Artagnan. Then at least turn the gem inside, you silly fellow, for everybody must be aware that a cadet from Gascony does not find such stones in his mother's jewel case. You think, then, I have something to dread? Asked D'Artagnan. I mean to say, young man, that he who sleeps over a mine the match of which is already lighted may consider himself in safety in comparison with you. The devil! Said D'Artagnan, whom the positive tone of Monsieur de Treville began to disquiet. The devil! What must I do? Above all things, be always on your guard. The cardinal has a tenacious memory and a long arm. You may depend on it. He will repay you by some ill turn. But of what sort? How can I tell? He has not all the tricks of a demon. Has he not all the tricks of a demon in his command? The least that can be expected is that you will be arrested. What? Will they dare to arrest a man in his Majesty's service? Pardieu! They did not scruple much in the case of Athos. At all events, young man, rely upon one who has been 30 years at court. Do not lull yourself in security, or you will be lost. But on the contrary, it is I who say it. See enemies in all directions. If anyone seeks to quarrel with you, shun it. Were it with a child of 10 years old, if you are attacked by day or by night, fight, but retreat without shame. If you cross a bridge, feel every plank of it with your foot, lest one should give way beneath you. If you pass beneath a house which is being built, look up, for fear a stone should fall upon your head. If you stay out late, be always followed by your lackey, and let your lackey be armed. If, by the by, you can be sure of your lackey, mistrust everybody, your friend, your brother, your mistress above all. D'Artagnan blushed. My mistress above all, repeated he mechanically. And why her rather than another? Because a mistress is one of the cardinal's favourite means. He has not one that is more expeditious. A woman will sell you for 10 pistoles, witness Delilah. You are acquainted with the Scriptures? D'Artagnan thought of the appointment Madame Bonacieux had made with him for that very evening. But we are bound to say, to the credit of our hero, that the bad opinion entertained by Monsieur de Treville of women in general did not inspire him with the least suspicion of his pretty hostess. But apropos, resumed Monsieur de Treville, what has become of your 3 companions? I was about to ask you if you had heard any news of them. None, monsieur. Well, I left them on my road. Porthos at Chantilly, with a duel on his hands, Aramis at Crevecoeur, with a ball in his shoulder, and Athos at Amiens, detained by an accusation of coining. See there now, said Monsieur de Treville, and how the devil did you escape? By a miracle, monsieur, I must acknowledge, with a sword thrust in my breast, and by nailing the Comte de Ward on the by-road to Calais, like a butterfly on a tapestry. There again! De Ward, one of the cardinal's men, a cousin of Rochefort. Stop, my friend, I have an idea. Speak, monsieur. In your place, I would do one thing. What? While his eminence was seeking for me in Paris, I would take, without sound of drum or trumpet, the road to Picardy, and would go and make some inquiries concerning my 3 companions. What the devil! They merit richly that piece of information on your piece of attention on your part. The advice is good, monsieur, and tomorrow I will set out. Tomorrow? Any why not this evening? This evening, monsieur, I am detained in Paris by indispensable business. Ah, young man, some flirtation or other. Take care, I repeat to you, take care. It is woman who has ruined us, still ruins us, and will ruin us, as long as the world stands. Take my advice, and set out this evening. Impossible, monsieur. You have given your word, then? Yes, monsieur. Ah, that's quite another thing. But promise me, if you should not be killed tonight, that you will go tomorrow. I promise it. Do you need money? I have still 50 pistoles. That, I think, is as much as I shall want. But your companions, I don't think they can be in need of any. We left Paris, each with 75 pistoles in his pocket. Shall I see you again before your departure? I think not, monsieur, unless something new should happen. Well, a pleasant journey. Thanks, monsieur. D'Artagnan left Monsieur de Tréville, touched more than ever by his paternal solicitude for his musketeers. He called successively at the abodes of Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. Neither of them had returned. Their lackeys likewise were absent, and nothing had been heard of either the one or the other. He would have inquired after them of their mistresses, but he was neither acquainted with Porthos's nor Aramis's, and as to Athos, he had none. As he passed the Hôtel des Gardes, he took a glance into the stables. 3 of the 4 horses had already arrived. Planchet, all astonishment, was busy grooming them, and had already finished 2. Ah, monsieur, said Planchet, on perceiving D'Artagnan, how glad I am to see you. Why so, Planchet? asked the young man. Do you place confidence in our landlord, Monsieur Bonacieux? I? Not the least in the world. Oh, you do quite right, monsieur. But why this question? Because, while you were talking with him, I watched you without listening to you, and, monsieur, his countenance changed color 2 or 3 times. Bah! Preoccupied as monsieur was with the letter he had received, he did not observe that, but I, whom the strange fashion in which that letter came into the house had placed on my guard, I did not lose a movement of his features. And you found it traitorous, monsieur. Indeed, still more. As soon as monsieur had left and reappeared round the corner of the street, Monsieur Bonacieux took his hat, shut his door, and set off at a quick pace in an opposite direction. It seems you are right, Planchet. All this appears to be a little mysterious, and be assured that we will not pay him our rent until the matter shall be categorically explained to us. Monsieur jests, but monsieur will see. What would you have, Planchet? What must come is written. Monsieur does not then renounce his excursion for this evening. Quite the contrary, Planchet. The more ill will I have toward Monsieur Bonacieux, the more punctual I shall be in keeping the appointment made by that letter, which makes you so uneasy. Then that is Monsieur's determination? Undeniably, my friend. At 9 o'clock, then. Be ready here at the hotel. I will come and take you. Planchet, seeing there was no longer any hope of making his master renounce his project, heaved a profound sigh, and set to work to groom the 3rd horse. As to D'Artagnan, being at bottom a prudent youth, instead of returning home, went and dined with the Gascon priest, who, at the time of the distress of the 4 friends, had given them a breakfast of chocolate. That brings us to the end of chapter 23, wherein there's a little scheming, and D'Artagnan intends fully to cheat with his landlord's wife. Generally, a sort of action that is frowned upon. And then the added delicious irony of him saying, we won't pay rent until he explains what he's up to. when we all know he hasn't paid rent in his entire stint in Paris. This man is shameless. Absolutely shameless. And you love it. All right. Let's continue now with Chapter 24, The Pavilion. At 9 o'clock, D'Artagnan was at the Hôtel de Garde. He found Planchet all ready. The fourth horse had arrived. Planchet was armed with his musketoon and a pistol. D'Artagnan had his sword and placed 2 pistols in his belt. Then both mounted and departed quietly. It was quite dark, and no one saw them go out. Planchet took place behind his master, and kept at a distance of 10 paces from him. D'Artagnan crossed the quays, went out by the gate of La Conférence, and followed the road, much more beautiful then than it is now, which leads to St. Cloud. As long as he was in the city, Planchet kept at the respectful distance he had imposed upon himself, but as soon as the road began to be more lonely and dark, he drew softly nearer, so that when they entered the Bois de Boulogne, he found himself riding quite naturally side by side with his master. In fact, we must not dissemble that the oscillation of the tall trees and the reflection of the moon in the dark underwood gave him serious uneasiness. D'Artagnan could not help perceiving that something more than usual was passing in the mind of his lackey, and said, "Well, Monsieur Planchet, what is the matter with us now?" "Don't you think, monsieur, that woods are like churches?" "How so, Planchet?" "Because we dare not speak aloud in one or the other." "But why did you not dare to speak aloud, Planchet?" "Because you are afraid." "Afraid of being heard?" "Yes, monsieur, afraid of being heard. Why, there is nothing improper in our conversation, my dear Planchet, and no one could find fault with it." "Ah, monsieur," replied Planchet, recurring to his besetting idea, "that Monsieur Bonacieux has something vicious in his eyebrows, and something very unpleasant in the play of his lips." "What the devil makes you think of Bonacieux?" "Monsieur, we think of what we can, not of what we will." "Because you are a coward, Planchet. Monsieur, we must not confound prudence with cowardice. Prudence is a virtue." "And you are very virtuous, are you not, Planchet? Monsieur, is not that the barrel of a musket which glitters yonder? Had we not better lower our heads?" "In truth," murmured D'Artagnan, to whom Monsieur de Tréville's recommendation recurred, "this animal will end by making me afraid," and he put his horse into a trot. Planchet followed the movements of his master, as if he had been his shadow, and was soon trotting by his side. "Are we going to continue this pace all night?" asked Planchet. "No. You are at your journey's end." "How, monsieur? And you?" "I am going a few steps farther." "And monsieur leaves me here alone?" "You are afraid, Planchet?" "No, I only beg leave to observe to monsieur that the night will be very cold, that chills bring on rheumatism, and that a lackey who has the rheumatism makes but a poor servant, particularly to a master as active as monsieur." "Well, if you are cold, Planchet, you can go into one of those cabarets that you see yonder, and be in waiting for me at the door by 6 o'clock in the morning." "Monsieur, I have eaten and drunk respectively the crown you gave me this morning, so that I have not a sou left in case I should be cold. Here's half a pistole tomorrow morning." D'Artagnan sprang from his horse, threw the bridle to Planchet, and departed at a quick pace, folding his cloak around him. "Good Lord, how cold I am!" cried Planchet, as soon as he had lost sight of his master, and in such haste was he to warm himself that he went straight to a house set out with all the attributes of a suburban tavern, and knocked at the door. In the meantime, D'Artagnan, who had plunged into a bypath, continued his route and reached St. Cloud. But instead of following the main street, he turned behind the chateau, reached a sort of retired lane, found himself soon in front of the pavilion named. It was situated in a very private spot. A high wall, at the angle of which was the pavilion, ran along one side of this lane. On the other was a little garden, connected with a poor cottage which was protected by a hedge from passers-by. He gained the place appointed, and as no signal had been given him by which to announce his presence, he waited. Not the least noise was there to be heard. It might be imagined that he was 100 miles from the capital. D'Artagnan leaned against the hedge, and after having cast a glance behind it, beyond that hedge, that garden, and that cottage, a dark mist enveloped with its folds that immensity where Paris slept, a vast void from which glittered a few luminous points, the funeral stars of that hell. But for D'Artagnan, all aspects were clothed happily. All ideas wore a smile, all shades were diaphanous. The appointed hour was about to strike. In fact, at the end of a few minutes, the belfry of St. Cloud let fall slowly 10 strokes from its sonorous jaws. There was something melancholy in this brazen voice, pouring out its lamentations in the middle of the night, but each of those strokes, which made up the expected hour, vibrated harmoniously to the heart of the young man. His eyes were fixed upon the little pavilion situated at the angle of the wall, of which all the windows were closed with shutters, except one on the first story. Through this window shone a mild light, which silvered the foliage of 2 or 3 linden trees, which formed a group outside the park. There could be no doubt that behind this little window, which threw forth such friendly beams, the pretty Madame Bonacieux expected him. Wrapped in this sweet idea, D'Artagnan waited half an hour without the least impatience, his eyes fixed upon that charming little abode, of which he could perceive a part of the ceiling with its gilded mouldings, attesting the elegance of the rest of the apartment. The belfry of St. Cloud sounded 10:30. This time, without knowing why, D'Artagnan felt a cold shiver run through his veins. Perhaps the cold began to affect him, and he took a perfectly physical sensation for a moral impression. Then the idea seized him that he had read incorrectly, and that the appointment was for 11 o'clock. He drew near to the window, and placing himself so that the ray of a light should fall upon the letter as he held it, he drew it from his pocket and read it again. But he had not been mistaken. The appointment was for 10 o'clock. He went and resumed his post, beginning to be rather uneasy at this silence and this solitude. 11 o'clock sounded. D'Artagnan began now really to fear that something had happened to Madame Bonacieux. He clapped his hands 3 times, the ordinary signal of lovers, but nobody replied to him, not even an echo. He then thought, with a touch of vexation, that perhaps the young woman had fallen asleep while waiting for him. He approached the wall and tried to climb it, but the wall had been recently pointed, and D'Artagnan could get no hold. At that moment he thought of the trees, upon whose leaves the light still shone, and as one of them drooped over the road, he thought that from its branches he might get a glimpse of the interior of the pavilion. The tree was easy to climb. Besides, D'Artagnan was but 20 years old, and consequently had not yet forgotten his schoolboy habits. In an instant he was among the branches, and his keen eyes plunged through the transparent panes into the interior of the pavilion. It was a strange thing, and one which made D'Artagnan tremble from the sole of his foot to the roots of his hair, to find that this soft light, this calm lamp, enlightened a scene of fearful disorder. One of the windows was broken. The door of the chamber had been beaten in and hung, split in 2 on its hinges. A table, which had been covered with an elegant supper, was overturned, the decanters broken in pieces, and the fruits crushed, strewed the floor. Everything in the apartment gave evidence of a violent and desperate struggle. D'Artagnan even fancied he could recognize, amid this strange disorder, fragments of garments, and some bloody spots staining the cloth and the curtains. He hastened to descend into the street with a frightful beating at his heart. He wished to see if he could find other traces of violence. The little soft light shone on in the calmness of the night. D'Artagnan then perceived a thing that he had not before remarked, for nothing had led him to the examination that the ground, trampled here and hoof-marked there, presented confused traces of men and horses. Besides, the wheels of a carriage, which appeared to have come from Paris, had made a deep impression in the soft earth, which did not extend beyond the pavilion, but turned again toward Paris. At length, D'Artagnan, in pursuing his researches, found near the wall a woman's torn glove. This glove, wherever it had not touched the muddy ground, was of irreproachable odor. It was one of those perfumed gloves that lovers like to snatch from a pretty hand. As D'Artagnan pursued his investigations, a more abundant and more icy sweat rolled in large drops from his forehead. His heart was oppressed by a horrible anguish. His respiration was broken and short, and yet he said, to reassure himself, that this pavilion, perhaps, had nothing in common with Madame Bonacieux, that the young woman had made an appointment with him before the pavilion, and not in the pavilion, that she might have been detained in Paris by her duties, or perhaps by the jealousy of her husband. But all these reasons were combated, destroyed, overthrown by that feeling of intimate pain which, on certain occasions, takes possession of our being, and cries to us so as to be understood unmistakably that some great misfortune is hanging over us. Then D'Artagnan became almost wild. He ran along the high road, took the path he had taken before, and, reaching the ferry, interrogated the boatman. About 7 o'clock in the evening, the boatman had taken over a young woman, wrapped in a black mantle, who appeared to be very anxious not to be discovered. But entirely on account of her precautions, the boatman had paid more attention to her, and discovered that she was young and pretty. There were then, as now, a crowd of young and pretty women who came to St. Cloud, and who had reasons for not being seen. And yet D'Artagnan did not for an instant doubt that it was Madame Bonacieux whom the boatman had noticed. D'Artagnan took advantage of the lamp which burned in the cabin of the ferryman to read the billet of Madame Bonacieux once again, and satisfy himself that he had not been mistaken, that the appointment was at St. Cloud and not elsewhere, before d'Estrées's pavilion, and not in another street. Everything conspired to prove to D'Artagnan that his presentiments had not deceived him, and that a great misfortune had happened. He again ran back to the chateau. It appeared to him that something might have happened at the pavilion in his absence, and that fresh information awaited him. The lane was still deserted, and the same calm, soft light shone through the window. D'Artagnan then thought of that cottage, silent and obscure, which had no doubt seen all and could tell its tale. The gate of the enclosure was shut, but he leaped over the hedge, and in spite of the barking of a chained-up dog, went up to the cabin. No one answered to his first knocking. Silence of death reigned in the cabin, as in the pavilion. But as the cabin was his last resource, he knocked again. As it soon appeared to him that he heard a slight noise within, a timid noise, which seemed to tremble lest it should be heard. Then D'Artagnan ceased knocking, and prayed with an accent so full of anxiety and promises, terror and cajolery, that his voice was of a nature to reassure the most fearful. At length, an old, worm-eaten shutter was opened, or rather pushed ajar, but closed again as soon as the light from a miserable lamp which burned in the corner had shone upon the baldric, sword-belt, and pistol pummels of D'Artagnan. Nevertheless, rapid as the movement had been, D'Artagnan had had time to get a glimpse of the head of an old man. "In the name of heaven," cried he, "listen to me. I have been waiting for someone who has not come. I am dying with anxiety. Has anything particular happened in the neighborhood? Speak!" The window was again opened slowly, and the same face appeared, only it was now still more pale than before. D'Artagnan related his story simply, with the omission of names. He told how he had a rendezvous with a young woman before that pavilion, and how, not seeing her come, he had climbed the linden tree, and by the light of the lamp had seen the disorder of the chamber. The old man listened attentively, making a sign that it was all so, and then, when D'Artagnan had ended, he shook his head with an air that announced nothing good. "What do you mean?" cried D'Artagnan. "In the name of heaven, explain yourself!" "Oh, monsieur," said the old man, "ask me nothing, for I dare tell you what I have seen. Certainly no good would befall me." "You have, then, seen something," replied D'Artagnan. "In that case, in the name of heaven," continued he, throwing him a pistole, "tell me what you have seen, and I will pledge you the word of a gentleman that not one of your words shall escape from my heart." The old man read so much truth and so much grief in the face of the young man that he made him a sign to listen, and repeated in a low voice, "It was scarcely 9 o'clock when I heard a noise in the street, and was wondering what it could be, when on coming to my door I found that somebody was endeavoring to open it. As I am very poor, and am not afraid of being robbed, I went and opened the gate, and saw 3 men at a few paces from it. In the shadow was a carriage with 2 horses and some saddle horses. These horses evidently belonged to the 3 men, who were dressed as cavaliers. 'Ah, my worthy gentleman,' cried I, 'what do you want?' 'You must have a ladder,' said he who appeared in the leader of the party. 'Yes, monsieur, the one with which I gather my fruit. Lend it to us, and go into your house again. There is a crown for the annoyance we have caused you. Only remember this, if you speak a word of what you may see or what you may hear, for you will look and you will listen, I am quite sure, however we may threaten you, you are lost.' At these words, he threw me a crown, which I picked up, and he took the ladder. After shutting the gate behind them, I pretended to return to the house, but I immediately went out a back door, and stealing along in the shade of the hedge, I gained yonder clump of elder, from which I could hear and see everything. The 3 men brought the carriage up quietly, and took out of it a little man, stout, short, elderly, and commonly dressed in clothes of a dark color, who ascended the ladder very carefully, looked suspiciously in at the window of the pavilion, came down as quietly as he had gone up, and whispered, 'It is she.' Immediately, he who had spoken to me approached the door of the pavilion, opened it with a key he had in his hand, closed the door, and disappeared, while at the same time the other 2 men ascended the ladder. The little old man remained at the coach door. The coachman took care of his horses, the lackey held to the saddle horses. All at once, great cries resounded in the pavilion, and a woman came to the window and opened it, as if to throw herself out of it. But as soon as she perceived the other 2 men, she fell back, and they went into the chamber. Then I saw no more, but I heard the noise of breaking furniture. The woman screamed and cried for help, but her cries were soon stifled. 2 of the men appeared, bearing the woman in their arms, and carried her to the carriage, into which the little old man got after her. The leader closed the window, came out an instant after by the door, and satisfied himself that the woman was in the carriage. His 2 companions were already on horseback. He sprang into his saddle. The lackey took his place by the coachman. The carriage went off at a quick pace, escorted by the 3 horsemen, and all was over. From the moment I have neither seen nor heard anything." D'Artagnan, entirely overcome by this terrible story, remained motionless and mute, while all the demons of anger and jealousy were howling in his heart. "But, my good gentleman," resumed the old man, upon whom this mute despair certainly produced a greater effect than cries and tears would have done, "do not take on so. They did not kill her, and that's a comfort." "Can you guess," said D'Artagnan, "who was the man who headed this infernal expedition?" "I don't know him." "But as you spoke to him, you must have seen him." "Oh, it's a description you want?" "Exactly so. a tall, dark man, with black moustaches, dark eyes, and the air of a gentleman. "That's the man!" cried D'Artagnan. "Again, he! Forever he! He is my demon, apparently. And the other? Which? The short one! Oh, he was not a gentleman, I'll answer for it. Besides, he did not wear a sword, and the others treated him with small consideration." "Some lackey," murmured D'Artagnan. Poor woman, what have they done with you?" "You have promised to be secret, my good monsieur," said the old man. "And I renew my promise. Be easy. I am a gentleman. A gentleman has but his word, and I have given you mine." With a heavy heart, D'Artagnan again bent his way toward the ferry. Sometimes he hoped it could not be Madame Bonacieux, and that he should find her next day at the Louvre. Sometimes he feared she had had an intrigue with another, who, in a jealous fit, had surprised her and carried her off. His mind was torn by doubt, grief, and despair. "Oh, if I had my three friends here," cried he, "I should have at least some hopes of finding her. But who knows what has become of them?" It was past midnight. The next thing was to find Planchet. D'Artagnan went successively into all the cabarets in which there was a light, but could not find Planchet in any of them. At the sixth, he began to reflect that the search was rather dubious. D'Artagnan had appointed 6 o'clock in the morning for his lackey, and wherever he might be, he was right. Besides, it came into the young man's mind that by remaining in the environs of the spot on which this sad event had passed, he would, perhaps, have some light thrown upon the mysterious affair. At the 6th cabaret, then, as we have said, D'Artagnan stopped, asked for a bottle of wine of the best quality, and, placing himself in the darkest corner of the room, determined thus to wait till daylight. But this time again his hopes were disappointed, and although he listened with all his ears, he heard nothing. Amid the oaths, coarse jokes, and abuse which passed between the laborers, servants, and carters who had comprised this honorable society of which he formed part, which could put him upon the least track of her who had been stolen from him, he was compelled then, after having swallowed the contents of his bottle, to pass the time as well as to evade suspicion, to fall into the easiest position in his corner, and to sleep, whether well or ill. D'Artagnan, be it remembered, was only 20 years old, and at that age sleep has its imprescriptible rights, which it imperiously insists upon, even with the saddest hearts. Towards 6 o'clock, D'Artagnan awoke with that uncomfortable feeling which generally accompanies the break of day after a bad night. He was not long in making his toilet. He examined himself to see if advantage had been taken of his sleep. Having found his diamond ring on his finger, his purse in his pocket, and his pistols in his belt, he rose, paid for his bottle, and went out to try if he could have any better luck in his search after his lackey than he had had the night before. The first thing he perceived through the damp grey mist was honest Planchet, who, with the 2 horses in hand, awaited him at the door of a little blind cabaret, before which D'Artagnan had passed without even a suspicion of its existence. All right, that brings us to the end of chapter 24. So, poor Madame Bonacieux has been kidnapped again. It's twice in almost as many days. This time, you may be onto it. It may be the husband. If he's in the company of the dark-haired nemesis of D'Artagnan, then he wouldn't have a whole lot of respect afforded him. All right, let's see. Ooh, this next one is quite long. So, we'll get started. We will have to take a break partway through this one, because When I say quite long, it is fully twice as long as the last couple chapters. So, we'll chew through this a little bit, take a break for a little bit when I need to stop and come up for air, and then we'll continue on. So, let's resume now with chapter 25. Porthos. Instead of returning directly home, D'Artagnan alighted at the door of Monsieur de Tréville and ran quickly up the stairs. This time he had decided to relate all that had passed. Monsieur de Tréville would doubtless give him good advice as to the whole affair. Besides, as Monsieur de Tréville saw the Queen almost daily, he might be able to draw from Her Majesty some intelligence of the poor young woman, whom they were doubtless making pay very dearly for her devotedness to her mistress. Monsieur de Tréville listened to the young man's account with a seriousness which proved that he saw something else in this adventure besides a love affair. When D'Artagnan had finished, he said, "Huh! All this savours of his eminence, a league off." "But what's to be done?" said D'Artagnan. "Nothing, absolutely nothing at present, but quitting Paris, as I told you, as soon as possible. I will see the Queen. I will relate to her the details of the disappearance of this poor woman, of which she is no doubt ignorant. These details will guide her on her part, and on your return I shall perhaps have some good news to tell you. Rely on me." D'Artagnan knew that, although a Gascon, Monsieur de Tréville was not in the habit of making promises, and that when by chance he did promise, he more than kept his word. He bowed to him. Then, full of gratitude for the past and for the future, and the worthy captain, who on his side felt a lively interest in this young man, so brave and so resolute, pressed his hand kindly, wishing him a pleasant journey. Determined to put the advice of Monsieur de Tréville in practice instantly, D'Artagnan directed his course toward the Rue de Fosseuse, in order to superintend the packing of his valise. On approaching the house, he perceived Monsieur Bonacieux in morning costume, standing at his threshold. All that the prudent Planchet had said to him the preceding evening about the sinister character of the old man recurred to the mind of D'Artagnan, who looked at him with more attention than he had done before. In fact, in addition to that yellow, sickly paleness, which indicates the insinuation of the bile in the blood, and which might, besides, be accidental, D'Artagnan remarked something perfidiously significant in the play of the wrinkled features of his countenance. A rogue does not laugh in the same way that an honest man does. A hypocrite does not shed the tears of a man of good faith. All falsehood is a mask. And however well made the mask may be, with a little attention, we may always succeed in distinguishing it from the true face. It appeared then to D'Artagnan that Monsieur Bonacieux wore a mask, and likewise that that mask was most disagreeable to look upon. In consequence of this feeling of repugnance, he was about to pass without speaking to him, but, as he had done the day before, Monsieur Bonacieux accosted him. "Well, young man," said he, "we appear to pass rather gay nights. 7 o'clock in the morning! Peste! You seem to reverse ordinary customs, and come home at the hour when other people are going out." "No one can reproach you." Yeah, Zoe is making herself known. Yes, being a chatterbox, aren't you? Yes. "No one can reproach you for anything of the kind, Monsieur Bonacieux," said the young man. "You are a model for regular people. It is true that when a man possesses a young and pretty wife, he has no need to seek happiness elsewhere. Happiness comes to him, does it not, Monsieur Bonacieux?" Bonacieux became pale as death and grinned a ghastly smile. "Ah, said Bonacieux, "you are a jocular companion. But where the devil were you gadding last night, my young master? It does not appear to be very clean in the crossroads." D'Artagnan glanced down at his boots, all covered with mud. But that same glance fell upon the shoes and stockings of the mercer, and it might have been said that they had been dipped in the same mud heap. Both were stained with splashes of mud of the same appearance. Then a sudden idea crossed the mind of D'Artagnan. That little stout man, short and elderly, that sort of lackey, dressed in dark clothes, treated without ceremony by the men wearing swords who composed the escort, was Bonacieux himself. The husband had presided at the abduction of his wife. A terrible inclination seized D'Artagnan to grasp the mercer by the throat and strangle him. But, as we have said, he was a very prudent youth, and he restrained himself. However, the revolution which appeared upon his countenance was so visible that Bonacieux was terrified at it, and he endeavored to draw back a step or two, but as he was standing before the half of the door which was shut, the obstacle compelled him to keep his place. "Ah, but you are joking, my worthy man," said D'Artagnan. "It appears to me that if my boots need a sponge, your stockings and shoes stand in equal need of a brush. May you not have been philandering a little also, Monsieur Bonacieux? Oh, the devil! That's unpardonable in a man your age, and who, besides, has such a pretty wife as yours." "Oh, Lord, no," said Bonacieux. "But yesterday I went to Saint Mande to make some inquiries after a servant, as I cannot possibly do without one, and the roads were so bad that I brought back all this mud, which I have not yet had time to remove." The place named by Bonacieux as that which had been the object of his journey was a fresh proof in support of the suspicions D'Artagnan had conceived. Bonacieux had named Mande because Mande was in an exactly opposite direction from St. Cloud. This probability afforded him his first consolation. If Bonacieux knew where his wife was, one might, by extreme means, force the mercer to open his teeth and let his secret escape. The question, then, was how to change this probability into a certainty. "Pardon, my dear Monsieur Bonacieux, if I don't stand upon ceremony," said D'Artagnan, "but nothing makes one so thirsty as want of sleep. I am parched with thirst. Allow me to take a glass of water in your apartment. You know that it is never refused among neighbors." Without waiting for the permission of his host, D'Artagnan went quickly into the house and cast a rapid glance at the bed. It had not been used. Bonacieux had not been abed. He had only been back an hour or two. He had accompanied his wife to the place of her confinement, or else, at least, to the first relay. "Thanks, Monsieur Bonacieux," said D'Artagnan, emptying his glass. "That is all I wanted of you. I will now go up into my apartment. I will make Planchet brush my boots, and when he is done, I will, if you like, send him to brush your shoes." He left the mercer quite astonished at his singular farewell, and asking himself if he had not been a little inconsiderate. At the top of the stairs, he found Planchet in a great fright. "Ah, monsieur!" cried Planchet, as soon as he perceived his master. "Here is more trouble. I thought you would never come in." "What's the matter now, Planchet?" demanded D'Artagnan. "Oh, I give you 100, I give you 1,000 times to guess, monsieur, the visit I received in your absence." "When?" "About half an hour ago, while you were at Monsieur de Tréville's." "Who has been here? Come, speak." "Monsieur de Cavois." "Monsieur de Cavois, in person? The captain of the cardinal's guards himself? Did he come to arrest me? I have no doubt that he did, monsieur, for all his wheedling manner." "Was he so sweet, then?" "Indeed, he was all honey, monsieur. Indeed! He came, he said, on the part of his eminence, who wished you well, and to beg you to follow him to the Palais Royal." "What did you answer him?" "That the thing was impossible, seeing that you were not at home, as he could see." "Well, what did he say then?" that you must not fail to call upon him in the course of the day. And then he added in a low voice, tell your master that his eminence is very well disposed toward him, and that his fortune perhaps depends upon this interview. The snare is rather maladroit for the cardinal, replied the young man, smiling. Oh, I saw the snare, and I answered you would be quite in despair on your return. Where has he gone? Asked Monsieur de Cavoy. To Troyes, in Champagne, I answered. When did he set out? Yesterday evening. Planchet, my friend, interrupted D'Artagnan. You really are a precious fellow. You will understand, monsieur. I thought there would still be time, if you wish, to see Monsieur de Cavoy to contradict me by saying you were not yet gone. The falsehood would then lie at my door, and as I am not a gentleman, I may be allowed to lie. Be of good heart, Planchet. You shall preserve your reputation as a veracious man. In a quarter of an hour, we set off. That's the advice I was about to give, monsieur. And where are we going, may I ask, without being too curious? Pardieu! In the opposite direction to which you said I was gone. Besides, are you not as anxious to learn news of Grimaud, Mousqueton, and Bazin as I am to know what has become of Athos, Porthos, and Aramis? Yes, monsieur, said Planchet, and I will go as soon as you please. Indeed, I think provincial air will suit us much better just now than the air of Paris. So then, pack up our luggage, Planchet, and let us be off. On my part, I will go out with my hands in my pockets, that nothing may be suspected. You may join me at the Hôtel des Gardes. By the way, Planchet, I think you are right with respect to our host, and that he is decidedly a frightfully low wretch. Ah, monsieur, you may take my word when I tell you anything. I am a physiognomist, I assure you. D'Artagnan went out first, as had been agreed upon. Then, in order that he might have nothing to reproach himself with, he directed his steps, for the last time, toward the residences of his three friends. No news had been received of them, only a letter, all perfumed and of an elegant writing in small characters, had come for Aramis. D'Artagnan took charge of it. 10 minutes afterward, Planchet joined him at the stables of the Hôtel des Gardes. D'Artagnan, in order that there might be no time lost, had saddled his horse himself. That's well, said he to Planchet, when the latter added the portmanteau to the equipment. Now, saddle the other 3 horses. Do you think, then, monsieur, that we shall travel faster with 2 horses apiece? Said Planchet with his shrewd air. No, monsieur Jester, replied D'Artagnan, but with our 4 horses we may bring back our 3 friends, if we should have the good fortune to find them living. Which is a great chance, replied Planchet, but we must not despair of the mercy of God. Amen, said D'Artagnan, getting into his saddle. As they went from the Hôtel des Gardes, they separated, leaving the street at opposite ends, one having to quit Paris by the Barrière de la Villette, and the other by the Barrière Montmartre, to meet again beyond Saint-Denis. A strategic maneuver which, having been executed with equal punctuality, was crowned with the most fortunate results. D'Artagnan and Planchet entered Pierrefitte together. Planchet was more courageous, it must be admitted, by day than by night. His natural prudence, however, never forsook him for a single instant. He had forgotten not one of the incidents of the first journey, and he looked upon everybody he met on the road as an enemy. It followed that his hat was forever in his hand, which procured him some severe reprimands from D'Artagnan, who feared that his excess of politeness would lead people to think he was the lackey of a man of no consequence. Nevertheless, whether the passengers were really touched by the urbanity of Planchet, or whether this time nobody was posted on this young man's road, our 2 travelers arrived at Chantilly without any incident, and alighted at the tavern of Great Saint Martin, the same at which they had stopped on their first journey. The host, on seeing a young man followed by a lackey with 2 extra horses, advanced respectfully to the door. Now, as they had already traveled 11 leagues, D'Artagnan thought it time to stop, whether Porthos were or were not in the inn. Perhaps it would not be prudent to ask at once what had become of the musketeer. The result of these reflections was that D'Artagnan, without asking information of any kind, alighted, commended the horses to the care of his lackey, entered a small room destined to receive those who wished to be alone, and desired the host to bring him a bottle of his best wine and as good a breakfast as possible, a desire which further corroborated the high opinion the innkeeper formed of the traveller at first sight. D'Artagnan was therefore served with miraculous celerity. The regiment of the guards was recruited among the first gentlemen of the kingdom, and D'Artagnan, followed by a lackey and travelling with 4 magnificent horses, despite the simplicity of his uniform, could not fail to make a sensation. The host desired himself to serve him, which D'Artagnan, perceiving, ordered 2 glasses to be brought, and commenced the following conversation. "Have my faith, my good host," said D'Artagnan, filling the 2 glasses. "I asked for a bottle of your best wine, and if you have deceived me, you will be punished in what you have sinned. For seeing that I hate drinking by myself, you shall drink with me. Take your glass, then, and let us drink. But what shall we drink to, so as to avoid wounding any susceptibility? Let us drink to the prosperity of your establishment." "Your lordship does me much honor," said the host, "and I thank you sincerely for your kind wish." "But don't mistake," said D'Artagnan. "There is more selfishness in my toast than perhaps you may think. For it is only in prosperous establishments that one is well received. In hotels that do not flourish, everything is in confusion, and the traveller is a victim to the embarrassments of his hosts. Now, I travel a great deal, particularly on this road, and I wish to see all innkeepers making a fortune." "It seems to me," said the host, "that this is not the first time I have had the honor of seeing monsieur." "Bah! I have passed perhaps 10 times through Chantilly, and out of the 10 times I have stopped 3 or 4 times at your house at least. Why, I was here only 10 or 12 days ago. I was conducting some friends, Musketeers, one of whom, by the by, had a dispute with a stranger, a man who sought a quarrel with him for I don't know what." "Exactly so," said the host. "I remember it perfectly. It is not Monsieur Porthos that your lordship means?" "Yes, that is my companion's name. My God, my dear host, tell me if anything has happened to him." "Your lordship must have observed that he could not continue his journey." "Why, to be sure, he promised to rejoin us, and we have seen nothing of him." "He has done us the honor to remain here." "What? He had done you the honor to remain here?" "Yes, monsieur, in this house, and we are even a little uneasy." "On what account?" "Of certain expenses he has contracted." "Well, but whatever expenses he may have incurred, I am sure he is in a condition to pay them." "Ah, monsieur, you infuse genuine balm into my blood. We have made considerable advances, and this very morning the surgeon declared that if Monsieur Porthos did not pay him, he should look to me, as it was I who had sent for him." "Porthos is wounded, then?" "I cannot tell you, monsieur." "What? You cannot tell me? Surely you ought to be able to tell me better than any other person." "Yes, but in our situation, we must not say all we know, particularly as we have been warned that our ears should answer for our tongues." "Well, can I see Porthos?" "Certainly, monsieur. Take the stairs on your right, go up the first flight and knock at number 1. Only warn him that it is you." "Why should I do that?" "Because, monsieur, some mischief might happen to you." "Of what kind, in the name of wonder?" "Monsieur Porthos may imagine you belong to the house, and in a fit of passion might run his sword through you or blow out your brains." "What have you done to him, then?" "We have asked him for money." "The devil! I can understand that. It is a demand that Porthos takes very ill when he is not in funds, but I know he must be so at present." "We thought so too, monsieur, as our house is carried on very regularly, and we make out our bills every week. At the end of 8 days we presented our account, but it appeared we had chosen an unlucky moment. For at the first word on the subject he sent us all to the devils. It is true he had been playing the day before." "Playing the day before? And with whom?" "Lord, who can say, monsieur? With some gentleman who has been travelling his way, to whom he proposed a game of lansquenet." "That's it. And the foolish fellow lost all he had." even to his horse, monsieur. For when the gentleman was about to set out, we perceived that his lackey was saddling Monsieur Porthos's horse, as well as his master's. When we observed this to him, he told us all to trouble ourselves about our own business. As to this horse, as this horse belonged to him, we also informed Monsieur Porthos of what was going on, but he told us we were scoundrels to doubt the gentleman's word, and that, as he had said the horse was his, it must be so. All right, let's take now as a kind of a break in their little conversation. We've found Porthos. We've also found that Porthos has lost his shirt because he's an inveterate gambler. So let's take a few minutes now, refill our drinks, stretch our legs, and we'll be back in just a little bit to hopefully bring about the reunion between Porthos and D'Artagnan, and the sad departure of D'Artagnan's wallet, because I'm sure he's probably going to have to stand for Porthos' debts. So, alright, we'll be back in just a few minutes, guys, and while we're gone, grab yourself a drink too. All right. Well, that's one way to end a break. Big old cough. Bet you ladies love to hear that. All right. So let's settle back in and resume where we left off. Their conversation was continuing. The reunion between Porthos and D'Artagnan is certainly coming nearby. Before we get to that, however, I'm going to shift my little bit of shilling to about the halfway point. Oh yeah, definitely just an incidental. It's so darn hot around here, you're kind of panting and heaving all the damn time. But anyway, yeah, I'm going to shift my my shilling to the midpoint of the video now, as opposed to the end. If you have not yet, I encourage you to go ahead and drop a like on the stream and maybe subscribe to the channel if you've not already. As always, we're trying to grow our little community here, our book club, as it were. One of the best ways to do that is to convince the algorithm to send people our way. So a like never goes amiss. And that's enough out of me doing the YouTube thing for the evening. Let's continue now from the about halfway point through chapter 25. That's Porthos all over, murmured D'Artagnan. Then, continued the host, I replied that, as from the moment we seemed not likely to come to a good understanding with respect to payment, I hoped that he would have at least the kindness to grant me the favour of his custom to my brother, host of the Golden Eagle. But Monsieur Porthos replied that, my house being the best, he should remain where he was. This reply was too flattering to allow me to insist on his departure. I confined myself, then, to begging him to give up his chamber, which is the handsomest in the hotel, and to be satisfied with a pretty little room on the 3rd floor. But to this, Monsieur Porthos replied that, as he every moment expected his mistress, who was one of the greatest ladies in the court, I might easily comprehend that the chamber he did me the honour to occupy in my house was itself very mean for the visit of such a personage. Nevertheless, while acknowledging the truth of what he said, I thought proper to insist. But, without even giving himself the trouble to enter into any discussion with me, he took out one of his pistols, laid it on his table day and night, and said that at the first word that should be spoken to him about removing, either within the house or out of it, he should blow out the brains of the person who should be so imprudent as to meddle with the matter which only concerned himself. Since that time, monsieur, nobody entered his chamber but his servant. What? Is Mousqueton here, then? Oh, yes, monsieur. 5 days after your departure he came back, and in a very bad condition, too. It appears that he had met with disagreeableness, likewise on his journey. Unfortunately, he is more nimble than his master, so that for the sake of his master he puts us all under his feet, and as he thinks we might refuse what he asks for, he takes all he wants without asking at all. The fact is, said D'Artagnan, I have always observed a great degree of intelligence and devotedness in Mousqueton. That is possible, monsieur, but suppose I should happen to be brought in contact, even 4 times a year, with such intelligence and devotedness, why, I should be a ruined man. No, for Porthos will pay you. Ha, said the host in a doubtful tone. The favourite of a great lady will not be allowed to be inconvenienced for such a paltry sum as he owes you. If I durst say what I believe on that head, what you believe? I ought rather to say what I know, what you know, and even what I am sure of. And of what are you so sure? I would say that I know this great lady. You? Yes, I. And how do you know her? Oh, monsieur, if I could believe, I might trust in your discretion. Speak! By the word of a gentleman, you shall have no cause to repent of your confidence. Well, monsieur, you understand that uneasiness makes us do many things. What have you done? Oh, nothing which was not right in the character of a creditor. Well, Monsieur Porthos gave us a note for his duchess, ordering us to put it in the post. This was before his servant came, as he could not leave his chamber. It was necessary to charge us with this commission. And then, instead of putting this letter in the post, which is never safe, I took advantage of the journey of one of my lads to Paris, and ordered him to convey the letter to this Duchess himself. This was fulfilling the intentions of Monsieur Porthos, who had desired us to be so careful of this letter, was it not? Nearly so. Well, monsieur, do you know who this great lady is? No, I have heard Porthos speak of her, that's all. Do you know who this pretended Duchess is? I repeat to you, I don't know her. Why, she is the old wife of a procurator of the Châtelet, monsieur, named Madame Coquenard, who, although she is at least 50, still gives herself jealous airs. It struck me as very odd that a princess should live in the Rue aux Arts. But how do you know all this? Because she flew into a great passion on receiving the letter, saying that Monsieur Porthos was a weathercock, and that she was sure it was for some woman he had received this wound. Has he been wounded, then? Oh, good Lord, what have I said? You said that Porthos had received a sword cut. Yes, but he has forbidden me to say so strictly to say so. And why so? Zounds, monsieur! Because he had boasted that he would perforate the stranger with whom you left him in dispute, whereas the stranger, on the contrary, in spite of all his rodomontades, quickly threw him on his back. As Monsieur Porthos is a very boastful man, he insists that nobody shall know he has received this wound except the Duchess, whom he endeavored to interest by an account of his adventure. It is a wound that confines him to his bed, and a masterstroke too, I assure you. Your friend's soul must stick tight to his body. Were you there, then? Monsieur, I followed them from curiosity, so that I saw the combat without the combatants seeing me. And what took place? Oh, the affair was not long, I assure you. They placed themselves on guard. The stranger made a feint and a lunge, and that so rapidly that when Monsieur Porthos came to the parade, he had already 3 inches of steel in his breast. He immediately fell backward. The stranger placed the point of his sword at his throat, and Monsieur Porthos, finding himself at the mercy of his adversary, acknowledged himself conquered. Upon which the stranger asked his name, and learning that it was Porthos and not D'Artagnan, he assisted him to rise, brought him back to the hotel, mounted his horse, and disappeared. So it was with Monsieur D'Artagnan that this stranger meant to quarrel. It appears so, and do you know what has become of him? No, I never saw him until that moment, and have not seen him since. Very well, I know all that I wish to know. Porthos' chamber is, you say, on the first story, number 1. Yes, monsieur, the handsomest in the inn, a chamber that I could have let 10 times over. Bah! Be satisfied, said D'Artagnan, laughing. Porthos will pay you the money of the Duchess Coquenard. Oh, monsieur, procurator's wife or duchess, if she will but loosen her purse strings, it will be all the same. But she positively answered that she was tired of the exigencies and infidelities of Monsieur Porthos, and that she would not send him a denier. And did you convey this answer to your guest? We took good care not to do that. He would have found in what fashion we had executed his commission. So that he still expects his money. Oh, Lord, yes, monsieur. Yesterday he wrote again, but it was his servant who this time put the letter in the post. Do you say the procurator's wife is old and ugly? 50, at least, monsieur, and not at all handsome, according to Pathal's account. In that case, you may be quite at ease. She will soon be softened. Besides, Porthos cannot owe you much. How not much? 20 good pistoles already, without reckoning the doctor. He denies himself nothing. It may easily be seen he has been accustomed to live well. Never mind. If his mistress abandons him, he will find friends. I will answer for it. So, my dear host, be not uneasy, and continue to take all the care of him that this situation requires. Monsieur has promised me not to open his mouth about the procurator's wife, and not to say a word of the wound. That's agreed. You have my word. Oh, he would kill me. Don't be afraid. He is not so much of a devil as he appears. Saying these words, D'Artagnan went upstairs, leaving his host a little better satisfied with respect to two things in which he appeared to be very much interested: his debt and his life. At the top of the stairs, upon the most conspicuous door of the corridor, was traced in black ink a gigantic number 1. D'Artagnan knocked, and upon the bidding to come in, which came from inside, he entered the chamber. Porthos was in bed, and was playing a game at lansquenet with Mousqueton to keep his hand in, while a spit loaded with partridges was turning before the fire, and on each side of a large chimney-piece, over 2 chafing dishes, were boiling 2 stewpans, from which exhaled a double odor of rabbit and fish stews, rejoicing to the smell. In addition to this, he perceived that the top of a wardrobe and the marble of a commode were covered with empty bottles. At the sight of his friend, Porthos uttered a loud cry of joy, and Mousqueton, rising respectfully, yielded his place to him, and went to give an eye to the 2 stewpans, of which he appeared to have the particular inspection. "Ah, pardieu, is that you?" said Porthos to D'Artagnan. "You are right welcome. Excuse me, I am not coming to meet you, but," added he, looking at D'Artagnan with a certain degree of uneasiness, "you know what has happened to me." "No. Has the host told you nothing, then? I asked after you, and came up as soon as I could." Porthos seemed to breathe more freely. "And what has happened to you, my dear Porthos?" continued D'Artagnan. "Why, on making a thrust at my adversary, whom I had already hit 3 times, and whom I meant to finish with the 4th, I put my foot on a stone, slipped, and sprained my knee." "Truly?" "Honor! Luckily for the rascal, for I should have left him dead on the spot, I assure you." "And what has become of him?" "Oh, I don't know. He had enough, and set off without waiting for the rest. But you, my dear D'Artagnan, what has happened to you?" "So that this strain of the knee," continued D'Artagnan, "my dear Porthos, keeps you in bed." "My God, that's all. I shall be about again in a few days." "Why did you not have yourself conveyed to Paris? You must be cruelly bored here." "That was my intention. But, my dear friend, I have one thing to confess to you." "What's that?" "It is that, as I was cruelly bored, as you say, and I have had the 75 pistoles in my pocket, which you had distributed to me, in order to amuse myself, I invited a gentleman who was traveling this way to walk up and proposed the cast of the dice. He accepted my challenge, and by my faith, my 75 pistoles passed from my pocket to his, without reckoning my horse, which he won into the bargain. But you, my dear D'Artagnan—" "What can you expect, my dear Porthos? A man is not privileged in all ways," said D'Artagnan. "You know the proverb, unlucky at play, lucky in love. You are too fortunate in your love to play, not to take its revenge. What consequence can the reverses of fortune be to you? Have you not, happy rogue that you are, have you not your Duchess, who cannot fail to come to your aid?" "Well, you see, my dear D'Artagnan, with what ill luck I play," replied Porthos with the most careless air in the world. "I wrote to her to send me 50 louis or so, of which I stood absolutely in need on account of my accident." Well, she must be at her country seat, for she has not answered me." "Truly?" "No. So I yesterday addressed another epistle to her, still more pressing than the first. But you are here, my dear fellow. Let us speak of you. I confess I began to be very uneasy on your account." "But your host behaves very well toward you, as it appears, my dear Porthos," said D'Artagnan, directing the sick man's attention to the full stewpans and the empty bottles. So, replied Porthos. "Only 3 or 4 days ago, the impertinent jackanapes gave me his bill, and I was forced to turn both him and his bill out the door, so that I am here something in the fashion of a conqueror, holding my position, as it were, my conquest. So you see, being in constant fear of being forced out from that position, I am armed to the teeth." "And yet," said D'Artagnan, laughing, "it appears to me that from time to time you must make sorties. And he again pointed to the bottles in the stewpans. Not I, unfortunately, said Porthos. This miserable strain confines me to my bed, but Mousqueton forages and brings in provisions. Friend Mousqueton, you see that we have a reinforcement, and we must have an increase in supplies. Mousqueton, said D'Artagnan, you must render me a service. What, monsieur? You must give your recipe to Planchet. I may be besieged in my turn, and I shall not be sorry for him to be able to let me enjoy the same advantages with which you gratify your master. Lord, monsieur, there is nothing more easy, said Mousqueton, with a modest air. One only needs to be sharp, that's all. I was brought up in the country, and my father, in his leisure time, was something of a poacher. And what did he do the rest of his time? Monsieur, he carried on a trade which I have always thought satisfactory. Which, as it was a time of war between the Catholics and the Huguenots, and as he saw the Catholics exterminate the Huguenots and the Huguenots exterminate the Catholics, all in the name of religion, he adopted a mixed belief, which permitted him to be sometimes Catholic, sometimes a Huguenot. Now, he was accustomed to walk with his fowling piece on his shoulder, behind the hedges which bordered the roads, and when he saw a Catholic coming alone, the Protestant religion immediately prevailed in his mind. He lowered his gun in the direction of the traveller. Then, when he was within 10 paces of him, he commenced a conversation which almost always ended by the traveller's abandoning his purse to save his life. It goes without saying that when he saw a Huguenot coming, he felt himself filled with such ardent Catholic zeal that he could not understand how, a quarter of an hour before, he had been able to have any doubts upon the superiority of our holy religion. For my part, monsieur, I am Catholic, my father faithful to his principles, having made my elder brother a Huguenot. And what was the end of this worthy man? Asked D'Artagnan. Oh, of the most unfortunate kind, monsieur. One day he was surprised in a lonely road between a Huguenot and a Catholic, which both of whom he had before had business, and who both knew him again, so they united against him and hanged him on a tree. Then they came and boasted of their fine exploit in the cabaret of the next village, where my brother and I were drinking. And what did you do? Said D'Artagnan. We let them tell their story out, replied Mousqueton. Then, as in leaving the cabaret they took different directions, my brother went and hid himself on the road of the Catholic, and I on that of the Huguenot. 2 hours after, all was over. We done the business of both, admiring the foresight of our poor father, who had taken the precaution to bring each of us up in a different religion. Well, I must allow, as you say, your father was a very intelligent fellow. And you say in his leisure moments, the worthy man was a poacher. Yes, monsieur, and it was he who taught me to lay a snare and ground a line. The consequence is that when I saw your labours, which did not at all suit two such delicate stomachs as ours, I had recourse to a little of my old trade. While walking near the wood of Monsieur le Prince, I laid a few snares in the runs, and while reclining on the banks of his Highness's pieces of water, I slipped a few lines into his fish ponds, so that now, thanks be to God, we do not want, as Monsieur can testify, for partridges, rabbits, carp, or eels, all light, wholesome food, suitable for the sick. But the wine, said D'Artagnan, who furnishes the wine? Your host? That is to say, yes and no. How yes and no? He furnishes it, it is true, but he does not know he has that honor. Explain yourself, Mousqueton. Your conversation is full of instructive things. That is it, monsieur. It has so chanced that I met with a Spaniard in my peregrinations, who had seen many countries, and among them the New World. What connection can the New World have with the bottles, which are on the commode, and the wardrobe? Patience, monsieur, everything will come in its turn. This Spaniard had in his service a lackey, who had accompanied him in his voyage to Mexico. This lackey was my compatriot, and we have become the more intimate, from there being many resemblances of character between us. We loved sporting of all kinds better than anything, so that he related to me how in the plains of the Pampas the natives hunt the tiger, and the wild bull with simple running nooses, which they throw to a distance of 20 or 30 paces, the end of a cord with such nicety. But in face of the proof, I was obliged to acknowledge the truth of the recital. My friend placed a bottle at the distance of 30 paces, and at each cast he caught the neck of the bottle in his running noose. I practiced this exercise, and as nature has endowed me with some faculties, at this day I can throw the lasso as with any man in the world. Well, do you understand, monsieur? Our host has a well-furnished cellar, the key of which never leaves him. Only this cellar has a ventilating hole. Now, through this ventilating hole I throw my lasso, and as I now know in which part of the cellar is the best wine, that's my point for sport. You see, monsieur, what the new world has to do with the bottles which are on the commode and the wardrobe. Now, will you taste our wine, and, without prejudice, say what you think of it? Thank you, my friend, thank you. Unfortunately, I have just breakfasted. Well, said Porthos, arrange the table, Mousqueton, and while we breakfast, D'Artagnan will relate to us what has happened to him during the 10 days since he left us. Willingly, said D'Artagnan. While Porthos and Mousqueton were breakfasting, with the appetites of convalescence and with that brotherly cordiality which unites men in misfortune, D'Artagnan related how Aramis, being wounded, was obliged to stop at Crevasseur, how he had left Athos fighting at Amiens, with 4 men who accused him of being a coiner, and how he, D'Artagnan, had been forced to run the Comte de Ward through the body in order to reach England. But there the confidence of D'Artagnan stopped. He only added that on his return from Great Britain, he had brought back 4 magnificent horses, one for himself and one for each of his companions. Then he informed Porthos that the one intended for him was already installed in the stable of the tavern. At this moment, Planchet entered to inform his master that the horses were sufficiently rested and that it would be possible to sleep at Clermont. As D'Artagnan was tolerably reassured with regard to Porthos, and as he was anxious to obtain news of his 2 other friends, he held out his hand to the wounded man, and told him he was about to resume his route in order to continue his researches. For the rest, as he reckoned upon returning by the same route in 7 or 8 days, if Porthos were still at the Great St. Martin, he would call for him on his way. Porthos replied that in all probability his sprain would not permit him to depart yet a while. Besides, it was necessary he should stay at Chantilly to wait for the answer from his duchess. D'Artagnan wished that answer might be prompt and favorable, and having again recommended Porthos to the care of Mousqueton and paid his bill to the host, he resumed his route with Planchet, already relieved of one of his led horses. And that brings us to the end of chapter 25. Well, there were some revelations through this chapter, were there not? Between Aramis, or between Porthos having unsurprisingly been a bit of a braggart, and having been taken out pretty much instantly in his little duel there, and then trying to turn it about and play it off as if, he was winning, but, tripped. Oh no, sprained my knee. Oh, I can't do it. I can't walk. I can't go back. And then Mousqueton, whose father was a bandit and a poacher, and imparted to his son all those important life lessons. And being able to lasso bottles of wine from the wine cellar through a little ventilation shaft. That's actually some skill. This guy's got some talents. Yeah, he just kept going on and on. Like, oh, this just keeps getting better. So not only was he a poacher in his spare time, but a highwayman. That's fine. That's fine. And all this while Porthos is as is in character. He's not quite the lover of a duchess. No, no. The lover of a widow of a lawyer. Okay. Okay. I see. Criminy, it's getting kind of toasty in here. I got the fans blowing full blast, and it is still a little... you know, that would make sense. So it may be that the adaptations may have combined Mousqueton with Porthos. Or Porthos himself might be a former pirate or highwayman, and has just sort of taken Mousqueton under his wing. But it strikes me that the adaptations may have left off the manservants and instead combined them into the characters of their masters. It's been a while since I actually saw any of the movies or the like. So either way could be true, honestly. All right. Let's continue now. We've got another bit of a doozy of one. So there are likely some more revelations to be had in this next chapter. Chapter 26, Aramis and his Thesis. D'Artagnan had said nothing to Porthos of his wound, or of his procurator's wife. Our Bernet was a prudent lad, however young he might be. I think I do remember that one, yeah. And then, because they did the early Three Musketeers movie, and then I think they also did The Man in the Iron Mask, did they not? I think that was the same cast. It's kind of gonna... That might bother me. Ah, yeah. I'm gonna have to rewatch that. Maybe after we finish this one. I'd rather not color my my reading until we've finished this one. But it's gonna be on my short list. I'm gonna have to acquire a copy. All right, let's continue here. D'Artagnan had said nothing to Porthos of his wound, or of his procurator's wife. Our Bernet was a prudent lad, however young he might be. Consequently, he had appeared to believe all that the vainglorious musketeer had told him, convinced that no friendship will hold out against a surprised secret. Besides, we feel always a sort of mental superiority over those whose lives we know better than they suppose. In his projects of intrigue for the future, and determined that as he was to make his three friends the instruments of his fortune, D'Artagnan was not sorry at getting into his grasp beforehand the invisible strings by which he reckoned upon moving them. That's a little devious there, D'Artagnan. I know it's a little much there. And yet, as he journeyed along, a profound sadness weighed upon his heart. He thought of that young and pretty Madame Bonacieux, who was to have paid him the price of his devotedness. But let us hasten to say that this sadness possessed the young man less from the regret of the happiness he had missed, than from the fear he entertained that some serious misfortune had befallen the poor woman. For himself, he had no doubt she was a victim of the cardinal's vengeance, and, as was well known, the vengeance of his eminence was terrible. How he had found grace in the eyes of the minister, he did not know, but without Monsieur de Cavois would have revealed this to him if the captain of the guards had found him at home. Okay, those castings make sense. The Man in the Iron Mask takes place of very good few years after the Three Musketeers, so the more mature cast makes a great deal of sense. Nothing makes time pass more quickly, or more shortens a journey, than a thought which absorbs in itself all the faculties of the organization of him who thinks. External existence then resembles a sleep of which this thought is the dream. By its influence, time has no longer measure, space has no longer distance. We depart from one place and arrive at another, that is all. Of the interval past, nothing remains in the memory but a vague mist in which 1,000 confused images of trees, mountains, and landscapes are lost. It was as a prey to this hallucination that D'Artagnan traveled. At whatever pace his horse pleased, the 6 or 8 leagues that separated Chantilly from Crèvecœur, without his being able to remember on his arrival in the village any of the things he had passed or met with on the road. There only his memory returned to him. He shook his head, perceived the cabaret in which he had left Aramis, and putting his shoes to the trot, he shortly pulled up at the door. This time it was not a host, but a hostess who received him. D'Artagnan was a physiognomist. His eye took in at a glance the plump, cheerful countenance of the mistress of the place, and he at once perceived that there was no occasion for dissembling with her, or of fearing anything from one blessed with such a joyous physiognomy. "My good dame," asked D'Artagnan, "can you tell me what has become of one of my friends, whom we were obliged to leave here about a dozen days ago?" "A handsome young man, 3 or 4 and 20 years old, mild, amiable, and well made?" "That is he, wounded in the shoulder." "Just so. Well, monsieur, he is still here." "Ah, pardieu, my dear dame," said D'Artagnan, springing from his horse and throwing the bridle to Planchet. "You restore me to life. Where is this dear Aramis? Let me embrace him. I am in a hurry to see him again." "Pardon, monsieur, but I doubt whether he can see you at this moment." "Why so? Has he a lady with him?" "Jesus! Why, what do you mean by that? Poor lad! No, monsieur, he has not a lady with him." "With whom is he, then?" "With the curate of the Montdidier, and the superior of the Jesuits of Amiens." "Good heavens!" cried D'Artagnan. "Is the poor fellow worse, then?" "No, monsieur, quite the contrary. But after his illness, grace touched him, and he determined to take orders." "That's it," said D'Artagnan. "I had forgotten that he was only a musketeer for a time." "Monsieur still insists upon seeing him, more than ever." "Well, monsieur has only to take the right-hand staircase in the courtyard, and knock at number 5 on the 2nd floor." D'Artagnan walked quickly in the direction indicated, and found one of those exterior staircases that are still to be seen in the yards of our old-fashioned taverns. But there was no getting at the place of sojourn of the future abbé. The defiles of the chamber of Aramis were as well guarded as the gardens of Armida. Bazin was stationed in the corner, and barred his passage with the more intrepidity that, after many years of trial, Bazin found himself near a result of which he had ever been ambitious. In fact, the dream of poor Bazin had always been to serve a churchman, and he awaited with impatience the moment, always in the future, when Aramis would throw aside the uniform and assume the cassock. The daily renewed promise of the young man that the moment would not long be delayed had alone kept him in the service of a musketeer, a service in which, he said, his soul was in constant jeopardy. Bazin was then at the height of joy. In all probability, this time his master would not retract. The union of physical pain with moral uneasiness had produced the effect so long desired. Aramis, suffering at once in body and mind, had at length fixed his eyes and his thoughts upon religion, and he had considered as a warning from heaven the double accident which had happened to him, that is to say, the sudden disappearance of his mistress and the wound in his shoulder. It may be easily understood that in the present disposition of his master, nothing could be more disagreeable to Bazin than the arrival of D'Artagnan, which might cast his master back again into that vortex of mundane affairs which had so long carried him away. He resolved then to defend the door bravely, and, As betrayed by the mistress of the inn, he could not say that Aramis was absent. He endeavored to prove to the newcomer that it would be the height of indiscretion to disturb his master in his pious conference, which had commenced with the morning and would not, as Bazin said, terminate before night. But D'Artagnan took very little heed of the eloquent discourse of Monsieur Bazin, and as he had no desire to support a polemic discussion with his friend's valet, he simply moved him out of the way with one hand, and with the other turned the handle of the door of number 5. The door opened, and D'Artagnan went into the chamber. Aramis, in a black gown, his head enveloped in a sort of round flat cap, not much unlike a calotte, was seated before an oblong table covered with rolls of paper and enormous volumes in folio. At his right hand was placed the superior of the Jesuits, and on his left the curate of Montdidier. The curtains were half drawn, and only admitted the mysterious light calculated for beatific reveries. All the mundane objects that generally strike the eye on entering the room of a young man, particularly when that young man is a musketeer, had disappeared as if by enchantment. And for fear, no doubt, that the sight of them might bring his master back to ideas of this world, Bazin had laid his hands upon sword, pistols, plumed hat, and embroideries, and laces of all kinds and sorts. In their stead, D'Artagnan thought he perceived, in an obscure corner, a discipline cord, suspended from a nail in the wall. At the noise made by D'Artagnan in entering, Aramis lifted his head and beheld his friend, but to the great astonishment of the young man, the sight of him did not produce much effect upon the musketeer. So completely was his mind detached from the things of this world. "Good day, dear D'Artagnan," said Aramis. "Believe me, I am glad to see you." "So am I delighted to see you," said D'Artagnan, "although I am not yet sure that it is Aramis I am speaking to." "To himself, my friend, to himself. But what makes you doubt it?" "I was afraid I had made a mistake in the chamber, and that I had found my way into the apartment of some churchman. Then another error seized me on seeing you in the company with these gentlemen. I was afraid you were dangerously ill." The two men in black, who guessed D'Artagnan's meaning, darted at him a glance which might have been thought threatening, but D'Artagnan took no heed of it. "I disturb you, perhaps, my dear Aramis," continued D'Artagnan, "for by what I see, I am led to believe that you are confessing to these gentlemen." Aramis colored imperceptibly. "You disturb me? Oh, quite the contrary. But, dear friend, I swear, and as a proof of what I say, permit me to declare I am rejoiced to see you safe and sound." "Ah, he'll come round," thought D'Artagnan. "That's not bad." "This gentleman, who is my friend, has just escaped from a serious danger," continued Aramis, with unction, pointing to D'Artagnan with his hand, and addressing the two ecclesiastics. "Praise God, monsieur," replied they, bowing together. "I have not failed to do so, your reverences," replied the young man, returning their salutation. "You arrive in good time, dear D'Artagnan," said Aramis, "and by taking part in our discussion, may assist us with your intelligence. Monsieur the Principal of Amiens, Monsieur the Curate of Montdidier, and I are arguing certain theological questions, in which we have been much interested. I shall be delighted to have your opinion." "The opinion of a swordsman can have very little weight," replied D'Artagnan, who began to be uneasy at the turn things were taking. "And you had better be satisfied, believe me, with the knowledge of these gentlemen." The two men in black bowed in their turn. "On the contrary," replied Aramis, "your opinion will be very valuable. The question is this. Monsieur the Principal thinks that my thesis ought to be dogmatic and didactic." "Your thesis? Are you then making a thesis?" "Without doubt," replied the Jesuit. "In the examination which precedes ordination, a thesis is always a requisite." "Ordination!" cried D'Artagnan, who could not believe that what the hostess and Bazin had successively told him. And he gazed, half stupefied, upon the three persons before him. "Now," continued Aramis, taking the same graceful position in his easy chair that he would have assumed in bed, and complacently examining his hand, which was as white and plump as that of a woman, and which he held in the air to cause the blood to descend. Now, as you have heard, D'Artagnan, Monsieur the Principal is desirous that my thesis should be dogmatic, while I, for my part, would rather it be ideal. This is the reason why Monsieur the Principal has proposed to me the following subject, which has not yet been treated upon, and in which I perceive there is matter for magnificent elaboration. Utroc monus in benedicendo claricis inferiobus necessaria est. D'Artagnan, whose erudition was, we are well acquainted with, evinced no more interest in hearing this quotation than he had of that of Monsieur de Tréville in allusion to the gifts he pretended that D'Artagnan had received from the Duke of Buckingham. Which means, resumed Aramis, that he might perfectly understand, the two hands are indispensable for priests of the inferior orders when they bestow the benediction. An admirable subject, cried the Jesuit. Admirable and dogmatic, repeated the curate, who, about as strong as D'Artagnan with respect to Latin, carefully watched the Jesuit in order to keep step with him, and repeated his words like an echo. As to D'Artagnan, he remained perfectly insensible to the enthusiasm of the two men in black. Yes, admirable, process admirabile, continued Aramis, but which requires a profound study of both the Scriptures and the Fathers. Now, I have confessed to these learned ecclesiastics that in all humanity, that the duties of mounting guard and the service of the king have caused me to neglect my study a little. I should find myself, therefore, more at my ease, facilius natans, in a subject of my own choice, which would be to these hard theological questions what morals are to metaphysics in philosophy. D'Artagnan began to be tired, and so did the curate. See what an exordium, cried the Jesuit. Exordium, repeated the curate, for the sake of saying something. Camad modum inter celorum emesitatem. Aramis cast a glance upon D'Artagnan to see what the effect all this produced, and found his friend gaping enough to split his jaws. Let us speak French, my father, said he to the Jesuit. Monsieur D'Artagnan will enjoy our conversation better. Yes, replied D'Artagnan, I am fatigued with reading, and all this Latin confuses me. Certainly, replied the Jesuit, a little put out, while the curate, greatly delighted, turned upon D'Artagnan a look full of gratitude. Well, let us see what is to be derived from this gloss. Moses, the servant of God, he was but a servant, please to understand. Moses blessed with the hands. He held out both his arms while the Hebrews beat their enemies, and then he blessed them with his two hands. Besides, what does the gospel say? Imponete manus, not manum. Place the hands, not the hand. Place the hands, repeated the curate with a gesture. Saint Peter, on the contrary, of whom the popes are the successors, continued the Jesuit. Porrige digitos, present the fingers. Are you there now? Certes, replied Aramis in a pleased tone. But the thing is subtle. The fingers, resumed the Jesuit. Saint Peter blessed with the fingers. The Pope therefore blesses with the fingers, and with how many fingers does he bless? With 3 fingers, to be sure. 1 for the Father, 1 for the Son, and 1 for the Holy Ghost. All crossed themselves. D'Artagnan thought it was proper to follow this example. The Pope is the successor of St. Peter, and represents the 3 divine powers, the rest, ordinis inferioris, of the ecclesiastical hierarchy, bless in the name of the holy archangels and the angels. The most humble clerks, such as our deacons and sacristans, bless with holy water sprinklers, which resemble an infinite number of blessing fingers. There is the subject simplified. Argumentum omni denudatum ornamento. I could make of that subject 2 volumes the size of this, continued the Jesuit, and in his enthusiasm he struck a St. Chrysostom in folio, which made the table bend beneath its weight. D'Artagnan trembled. Certes, said Aramis, I do justice to the beauties of this thesis, but at the same time I perceive it would be overwhelming for me. I had chosen this text. Tell me, dear D'Artagnan, if it is not to your taste. Non inutile est desiderium in oblatione. That is, a little regret is not unsuitable in an offering to the Lord. Stop there, cried the Jesuit, for that thesis touches closely upon heresy. There is a proposition almost like it in the Augustinus of the heresiarch Jansenius, whose book will sooner or later be burned by the hands of the executioner. Take care, my young friend, you are inclining toward false doctrines. My young friend, you will be lost. You will be lost, said the curate, shaking his head sorrowfully. You approach that famous point of free will, which is a mortal rock. You face the insinuations of the Pelagians and the semi-Pelagians. But, my reverend, replied Aramis, in a little amazed by the shower of arguments that poured upon his head. How will you prove, continued the Jesuit, without allowing him time to speak, that we ought to regret the world when we offer ourselves to God? Listen to this dilemma. God is God, and the world is the devil. To regret the world is to regret the devil. That is my conclusion. And that's mine also, said the curate. But for heaven's sake, resumed Aramis. Desiderus diabolum, unhappy man, cried the Jesuit. He regrets the devil. Ah, my young friend, added the curate, groaning, do not regret the devil, I implore you. D'Artagnan felt himself bewildered. It seemed to him as though he were in a madhouse, and was becoming as mad as those he saw. He was, however, forced to hold his tongue from not comprehending half the language they employed. But listen to me, then, resumed Aramis, with politeness, mingled with a little impatience. I do not say I regret. No, I will never pronounce that sentence, which would not be orthodox. The Jesuit raised his hands toward heaven, and the curate did the same. No, but pray grant me that it is acting with an ill grace to offer to the Lord only that which we are perfectly disgusted. Don't you think so, D'Artagnan? I think so, indeed, cried he. The Jesuit and the curate quite started from their chairs. This is the point of departure. It is a syllogism. The world is not wanting in attractions. I quit the world. Then I make a sacrifice. Now, the scripture says positively, make a sacrifice unto the Lord. That is true, said his antagonists. And then, said Aramis, pinching his ear to make it red, as he rubbed his hands to make them white, and then I made a certain rondeau upon it last year, which I showed to Monsieur Vautrin, and that great man paid me 1,000 compliments. A rondeau, said the Jesuit disdainfully. A rondeau, said the curate mechanically. Repeat it, cried D'Artagnan. It will make a little change. Not so, for it is religious, replied Aramis. It is theology in verse. The devil, said D'Artagnan. Here it is, said Aramis, with a little look of diffidence, which, however, was not exempt from a shade of hypocrisy. Oh, God, it's so long. Hang on. Veux qui pleures un passé plein de charmes, et qui traînez des jours infortunés, tous vos malheurs sévèrent tourmenés, quand à Dieu sur vous offrez vos larmes, vous qui pleurez. We're switching between English, Latin, and French in the same godforsaken chapter. You who weep for pleasures fled, while dragging on a life of care, all your woes will melt in air, if to God your tears are shed, you who weep. D'Artagnan and the curate appeared pleased. The Jesuit persisted in his opinion. Beware of a profane taste in your theological style. What says Augustine on this subject? Severus sit clericorum verbo. Yes, let the sermon be clear, said the curate. Now, hastily interrupted the Jesuit, on seeing that his acolyte was going astray, now your thesis would please the ladies. It would have the success of one of Monsieur Patrou's pleadings. Praise God! Cried Aramis, transported. There it is, cried the Jesuit. The world still speaks within you in a loud voice. Altissima voce! You follow the world, my young friend, and I tremble lest grace prove not efficacious. Be satisfied, my reverend father. I can answer for myself. Mundane presumption! I know myself, father. My resolution is irrevocable. Then you persist in continuing that thesis. I feel myself called upon to treat that, and no other. I will see about the continuation of it, and tomorrow I hope you will be satisfied with the corrections I shall have made in consequence of your advice. Work slowly, said the curate. We leave you in an excellent tone of mind. Yes, the ground is all sown, said the Jesuit, and we have not to fear that one portion of the seed may have fallen upon stone, another upon the highway, or that the birds of heaven have eaten the rest. Avis caeli comederunt ilium. Plague stifle you in your Latin, said D'Artagnan, who began to feel all his patience exhausted. Farewell, my son, said the curate, till tomorrow. Till tomorrow, rash youth, said the Jesuit. You promise to become one of the lights of the church. Heaven grant that this light prove not a devouring fire. D'Artagnan, who for an hour past had been gnawing his nails with impatience, was beginning to attack the quick. The two men in black rose, bowed to Aramis and D'Artagnan, and advanced toward the door. Bazin, who had been standing listening to all this controversy with a pious jubilation, sprang toward them, took the breviary of the curate and the missal of the Jesuit, and walked respectively before them to clear their way. Aramis conducted them to the foot of the stairs, and then immediately came up again to D'Artagnan, whose senses were still in a state of confusion. When left alone, the two friends at first kept an embarrassed silence. It, however, became necessary for one of them to break it first, and as D'Artagnan appeared determined to leave that honor to his companion, Aramis said, "You see that I am returned to my fundamental ideas." Yes, efficacious grace has touched you, as that gentleman said just now. Oh, these plans of retreat have been formed for a long time. You have often heard me speak of them, have you not, my friend? Yeah, I appreciated that D'Artagnan shared my umbrage. Yes, but I confess, I always thought you jested. With such things, D'Artagnan, the devil! Why, people jest with death. And people are wrong, D'Artagnan, for death is the door which leads to perdition or to salvation. Granted, but if you please, let us not theologize, Aramis. You must have had enough for today. As for me, I have almost forgotten the little Latin I have ever known. Then I confess to you that I have eaten nothing since 10 o'clock this morning, and I am devilish hungry. We will dine directly, my friend. Only you must please to remember that this is Friday. Now, on such a day, I can neither eat flesh nor see it eaten. If you can be satisfied with my dinner, it consists of cooked tetragones and fruits. What do you mean by tetragones? Asked D'Artagnan uneasily. I mean spinach, replied Aramis, but on your account I will add some eggs. And that is a serious infraction of the rule, for eggs are meat, since they engender chickens. This feast is not very succulent, but never mind. I will put up with it for the sake of remaining with you. I am grateful to you for the sacrifice, said Aramis, but if your body will not be greatly benefited by it, be assured your soul will. And so, Aramis, you are decidedly going into the church. What will our two friends say? What will Monsieur de Treville say? They will treat you as a deserter, I warn you. I do not enter the church. I re-enter it. I deserted the church for the world, for you know that I forced myself when I became a musketeer. I know nothing about it. You don't know I quit the seminary? Not at all. This is my story, then. Besides, the scriptures say, confess yourself to one another. And I confess to you, D'Artagnan. And I give you absolution beforehand. You see, I am a good sort of man. Do not jest about holy things, my friend. Go on, then. I listen. I had been at the seminary from 9 years old. In 3 days, I should have been 20. I was about to become an abbé, and all was arranged. One evening I went, according to custom, to a house which I frequented with much pleasure when one is young. What can be expected? One is weak. An officer who saw me, with a jealous eye, reading the lives of the saints to the mistress of the house, entered suddenly, and without being announced. That evening I had translated an episode of Judith, and had just communicated my verses to the lady, who gave me all sorts of compliments, and leaning on my shoulder, was reading them a second time with me. Her pose, which I must admit was rather free, wounded this officer. He said nothing, but when I came out he followed, and quickly came up to me. Monsieur the Abbé, said he, do you like blows with a cane? I cannot say, monsieur, answered I. No one has ever dared to give me any. Well, listen to me then, Monsieur the Abbé. If you venture again into the house in which I have met you this evening, I will dare it myself. I really think I must have been frightened. I became very pale. I felt my legs fail me. I sought for a reply, but could find none. I was silent. The officer waited for his reply, and seeing it so long coming, he burst into a laugh, turned upon his heel, and re-entered the house. I returned to the seminary. I am a gentleman born, and my blood is warm, as you may have remarked. My dear D'Artagnan, the insult was terrible, and although unknown to the rest of the world, I felt it live and fester at the bottom of my heart. I informed my superiors that I did not feel myself sufficiently prepared for ordination, and at my request the ceremony was postponed for a year. I sought out the best fencing master in Paris. I made an agreement with him to take a lesson every day, and every day for a year I took that lesson. Then, on the anniversary of the day on which I had been insulted, I hung my cassock on a peg, assumed the costume of a cavalier, and went to a ball, given by a lady friend of mine, to which I knew my man was invited. It was in the Rue de France Bourgeois, close to La Fosse, as I expected. My officer was there. I went up to him as he was singing a love ditty and looking tenderly at a lady, and interrupted him exactly in the middle of the second couplet. Monsieur, said I, does it still displease you that I should frequent a certain house of La Rue Payenne? Would you still cane me if I took it into my head to disobey you? The officer looked at me with astonishment, and then said, What is your business with me, monsieur? I do not know you. I am, said I, the little abbé who reads Lives of the Saints, and translates Judith into verse. Ah, I recollect now, said the officer, in a jeering tone. Well, what do you want with me? I want you to spare time to take a walk with me. Tomorrow morning, if you like, with the greatest pleasure. No, not tomorrow morning, if you please, but immediately. If you absolutely insist. I do insist upon it. Come then, ladies, said the officer. Do not disturb yourselves. Allow me time to just kill this gentleman, and I will return and finish the last couplet. we went out. I took him to the Rue Payenne, to exactly the same spot where, a year before, at the very same hour, he had paid me the compliment I have related to you. It was a superb moonlight night. We immediately drew, and at the first pass I laid him stark dead. "The devil!" cried D'Artagnan. "Now," continued Aramis, "as the ladies did not see the singer come back, and as he was found in the Rue Payenne with a great sword wound through his body, it was supposed that I had accommodated him thus. And the matter created some scandal, which obliged me to renounce the cassock for a time. Athos, whose acquaintance I made about that period, and Porthos, who had, in addition to my lessons, taught me some effective tricks of fence, prevailed upon me to solicit the uniform of a musketeer. The king entertained great regard for my father, who had fallen at the siege of Arras, and the uniform was granted. You may understand that the moment has come for me to re-enter the bosom of the church." "And why today rather than yesterday or tomorrow? What has happened to you today to raise all these melancholy ideas?" "This wound, my dear D'Artagnan, has been a warning to me from heaven." "This wound? Bah! It is now nearly healed, and I am sure it is not that which gives you the most pain." "What then?" said Aramis, blushing. "You have one at heart, Aramis, one deeper and more painful, a wound made by a woman." The eye of Aramis kindled in spite of himself. "Ah!" said he, dissembling his emotion under a feigned carelessness, "do not talk of such things, and suffer love pains. Vanitas, vanitatum! According to your idea, then, my brain is turned. And for whom? For some grisette? Some chambermaid with whom I have trifled in some garrison? Fie! Pardon, my dear Aramis, but I thought you carried your eyes higher. Higher? And who am I to nourish such ambition? A poor musketeer, a beggar, an unknown, who hates slavery and finds himself ill-placed in the world." "Aramis, Aramis!" cried D'Artagnan, looking at his friend with an air of doubt. "Dust I am, and to dust I return. Life is full of humiliations and sorrows," continued he, becoming still more melancholy. "All the ties which attach him to life break in the hand of man, particularly the golden ties. Oh, my dear D'Artagnan," resumed Aramis, giving to his voice a slight tone of bitterness, "trust me. Conceal your wounds when you have any. Silence is the last joy of the unhappy. Beware of giving anyone the clue to your griefs. The curious suck our tears as flies suck the blood of a wounded heart." "Alas, my dear Aramis," said D'Artagnan, in his turn heaving a profound sigh, "that is my story you are relating." "How?" "Yes, a woman whom I love, whom I adore, has just been torn from me by force. I do not know where she is or whither they have conducted her. She is perhaps a prisoner. She is perhaps dead." "Yes, but you have at least this consolation, that you can say to yourself she has not quit you voluntarily. That if you learn no news of her, it is because all communication with you is interdicted, while I... well..." "Nothing," replied Aramis, "nothing." "So you renounce the world, then, forever? That is a settled thing? A resolution registered?" "Forever! You are my friend today. Tomorrow you will be no more to me than a shadow, or rather, even, you will no longer exist. As for the world, it is a sepulchre, and nothing else." "The devil! Oh, this is very sad what you tell me." "What will you? My vocation commands me. It carries me away." D'Artagnan smiled, but made no answer. Aramis continued, "And yet, while I do belong to the earth, I wish to speak of you, of our friends." "And on my part," said D'Artagnan, "I wish to speak of you. But I find you so completely detached from everything. To love you, cry, fie! Friends are shadows, the world is a sepulchre." "Alas, you will find it so yourself," said Aramis with a sigh. "Well, then, let us say no more about it," said D'Artagnan, "and let us burn this letter, which no doubt announces to you some fresh infidelity of your grisette or your chambermaid." "What letter?" cried Aramis eagerly. "A letter which was sent to your abode in your absence, and which was given to me for you." "But from whom is that letter?" "Oh, from some heartbroken waiting woman, some desponding grisette, from Madame de Chevreuse' chambermaid, perhaps, who was obliged to return to Tours with her mistress, and who, in order to appear smart and attractive, stole some perfumed paper, and sealed her letter with a duchess's coronet." "What do you say? Hold, I must have lost it," said the young man maliciously, pretending to search for it. "But fortunately the world is a sepulchre, the men, and consequently the women, are but shadows, and love is a sentiment to which you cry, 'Fie, fie!' D'Artagnan! D'Artagnan!" cried Aramis. "You are killing me!" "Well, here it is at last," said D'Artagnan, as he drew the letter from his pocket. Aramis made a bound, seized the letter, read it, or rather devoured it, his countenance radiant. "This same waiting maid seems to have an agreeable style," said the messenger carelessly. "Thanks, D'Artagnan, thanks!" cried Aramis, almost in a state of delirium. "She was forced to return to Tours. She is not faithless, she still loves me! Come, my friend, come, let me embrace you! Happiness almost stifles me!" The two friends began to dance around the venerable Saint Chrysostom, kicking about famously the sheets of the thesis, which had fallen to the floor. At that moment, Bazin entered with the spinach and the omelette. "Be off, you wretch!" cried Aramis, throwing his skullcap in his face. "Return whence you came. Take back those horrible vegetables, and that poor kickshaw. Order a larded here, a fat capon, a mutton leg dressed with garlic, and 4 bottles of old Burgundy." Bazin, who had looked at his master, without comprehending the cause of this change, in a melancholy manner, allowed the omelette to slip into the spinach, and the spinach onto the floor. "Now, this is the moment to consecrate your existence to the King of Kings," said D'Artagnan. "If you persist in offering him a civility, non inutile desiderium oblatione. Go to the devil with your Latin. Let us drink, my dear D'Artagnan, mon bleu! Let us drink while the wine is fresh. Let us drink heartily, and while we do so, tell me a little of what is going on in the world yonder." All right, that brings us to the end of chapter 26. We carried over quite a bit, but I had to get that chapter out. That was a fun one, honestly. Between the back and forth bantering, as much as it tortured me, the Latin and the French in the same godforsaken chapter, but the ups and the downs and Aramis's a very quick about face upon receipt of the letter were a lot of fun. That one was brutal, let's be honest. It was long. There was like 4 or 5 different voices going on and 3 different languages. It was an adventure. Not the adventure I was expecting when I decided to read Three Musketeers, but it was an adventure nonetheless. Alright guys, we are well and goodly over time tonight, so let's go ahead and call it a wrap for the evening. We will resume tomorrow from chapter 27, where we will hopefully reunite with Athos, because we are very nearly the whole happy bunch accounted for, if not all together again. So, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I am going to go rest my voice and my eyes, and hopefully get some healthy separation from all Latin for the evening. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. Have a wonderful evening. Good night, everyone.